We have.
Yeah.
There's a second. Do we want to put on?
Yes, I closed the file. And we got it.
Okay. What was that?
I think the picture.
Yeah.
They were the ones that were.
Yeah. Tomorrow, right? Okay. Well, like, yeah. Yeah, we thought of it. And we were like, we should bring it back. But I think
You're right.
yeah. I don't care what. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It's very. Yeah. Usually I drive myself, but we only have one car. My wife has some.
I have one.
Was for. That's what I looked at, but it's still. I'll.
Okay, you can mention it.
That's why he's like, because they gave in the school, his name.
What's your next job?
That's how they like it.
They just like if you
This, well, this teacher took this. His grade 7. And they have others. Government wanting the they have the. They even got the grades to draw. It's story.
Okay. Yeah, namin yung menu. Okay. Are you?
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to this very important event. My name is Sydney Weisner, and I'm the Holocaust Education Chair at McMaster HEW. And the reason why I'm so involved in Holocaust education is because I truly think it is so important for everyone to learn about the atrocities of the Holocaust and get educated on this topic in order to ensure that the promise of never again can be fulfilled. And my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, so I also have personal reasons why I am especially dedicated to this cause. And I'm so grateful that so many of you showed up tonight to learn about Andy's story, because there's no better way to learn about the Holocaust than from a survivor himself, who can really tell you something that you can't necessarily read in a textbook, and his own personal experience. And it's so important to learn from as many survivors as we can, especially now when we have the opportunity to do so instead of in digital files or online, etc. And such hatred doesn't begin in a vacuum. It begins with ignorance. So it's really amazing that you're all educating yourself on this topic in order to fulfill the promise of never again, and to learn how to recognize anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry and to speak out against them. And without further ado, we'd also like to thank the Simon Wiesenthal Center for allowing us to hear from Andy tonight. Andy Reti is a child survivor of the Holocaust. Born in 1942 in Budapest, he was only 2 years old when his mother and grandmother were forced out of their home in Hungary and into a Jewish ghetto. Andy's father and grandfather had already been moved into a forced labor camp. He was liberated from the Budapest ghetto on January 18, 1945, by the Soviet Red Army. He and his mother, grandmother, and grandfather survived the horrors of the war through good fortune and grit. They immigrated to Canada shortly thereafter. Andy attributes his survival to the courage, resilience, and sacrifice of his mother and grandmother. He believes that every Holocaust survivor's story is a love story, and the love of life, freedom, family, and freedom. Andy has been involved in Holocaust education since 1998. In 2001, he wrote The Son of an Extraordinary Woman, a sequel to his mother's book, An Ordinary Woman in Extraordinary Times, which was written in 1990. In 2016, the two books were combined and re-released as Stronger Together. So without further ado, give a hand for Andy Reti. It's time to start.
Hello, good evening, and thank you. I usually do not have such a detailed introduction, and I say after reading that, you don't need to hear from me because they heard most of it already. However, I will try to illustrate some additional points that was left out. Plus, if we repeat things, it gives us a better opportunity to learn. So, as I said, shalom and thank you. Thank you for two very distinct but special reasons. You are helping to honor my mother and her contemporaries, and you are here to learn. For me personally, to address a live audience after being out of work for 3 years is a pleasure, because Zoom just does not cut it. For me to see you, interact with you, listen to you, is what this is all about. This is only my second time that I'm addressing our Hillel group. And it just so happens that my name is Hillel Ben Menashe. So it is most appropriate, and thank you. Now, as you see, the presentation you're about to hear is called The Ring of Love, and I am wearing the ring of love. However, before we get into the actual presentation, I must emphasize something really important. I am truly a survivor. I survived the horrors because of the incredible foresight, prescience, devotion, and love of my mother and grandmother. My mother's contemporaries are eyewitnesses, and that's the difference between a survivor and an eyewitness. And sadly, we're losing our precious eyewitnesses way too quickly. At the beginning, when the Holocaust Center in Toronto was created in 1985, we had well over 70 speakers. Today, we are less than a dozen. There are 3 of us contemporaries, the same age as I am. And since you heard it, I am 80 years young, and there are only 3 of us. The rest are all over 90. And that is why it is so important, as Sydney said, for you to hear a story from a survivor. But it is only about 25% my story, 75% my mother's. As you heard, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and at the time, the Hungarian Jews were mostly untouched, relatively speaking, compared to all the other population of Europe. Hungary was an ally of Germany, and in fact, the horrors of the Hungarian Shoah didn't start until spring, more specifically, March 15, 1944, and it ended in April 4, 1945. But the speed, the brutality, and the efficiency with which the Nazis rounded up the Jews were pale in comparison to all the others. In fact, proportionately, numerically, they murdered more Hungarians in less than 9 months than again all the territories combined. So, first one, please. I had the privilege and honor to work with my mother. We were the only mother and son, in fact, parent and offspring, both survivors. My mother started speaking at the Holocaust Center in 1985, pretty well at the opening. I joined in 1998 as a docent, which of course means museum guide in Latin. I did not start to speak until my dear mother passed away. I only started telling her story after she passed away. And for the people at the Holocaust Center, it was a huge question mark. How is Andy going to tell Ibby's story? Well, you'll be the judge at the end. Next one. Oh, sorry, this one, sorry. Okay. I had the privilege of working with my mother, and we have a gallery at the Holocaust Center in Toronto, which, by the way, as of June 8th of this year, will become officially a Holocaust museum. I extend the invitation to all of you to come and see us. It is the most modern, up-to-date, technologically designed Holocaust museum. I think it will in the world. Just on a side, Toronto is one of the largest concentration of Holocaust survivors after New York and Florida. No, I have to read this. I had the privilege of working with her, and this is what she had to say. And I am kind of making this a little bit long because I said, you're going to hear the story titled The Ring of Love. But if I'm going to ask you, what is the opposite to love? What would you tell me?
Indifference.
Very good. What else?
Hate.
Exactly. Those are 2 very good descriptions. And because I had the privilege of working not only with my mother, but I had the privilege of hearing all the other survivors, I can tell you there are a lot of common experiences with survivors. And having listened to the survivors, I came away with the conclusion that every Holocaust survivor story is a love story. Love of life, love of family, and love of freedom. And in the next 37.5 minutes, we'll connect those 3 very, very deep human emotions. So this is what my mother had to say. I was on a portrait gallery. I was very bitter for many long years, but you can't live with hatred in your heart all the time. To forgive, I can't. And I can't forget it either. The hurt deep in my heart will stay till I die. She died of very young 88. She died the way she lived, with incredible courage and determination. She had defeated cancer once. She only succumbed to it the second time. She passed. Good for me. Yes, yes. I don't have to tell you the significance of what the necklace is, but just in case, if some people don't know, it is the Hebrew letter HEW, spelled high, meaning life. Now, I know that this is a special group, and I would be surprised if you did not hear Fiddler on the Roof, but there is a song in there which says, to life, to life. The I am. That's it, that's my extension. So that is very significant, and I want you to pay particular attention to this slide because we'll come back to it later. In case if you will not have an opportunity to see up front and personal my ring, is the picture of it. Next one. 1939. I don't have to tell you what that year was. A lot of people think that is the official start of the Second World War. Some people think it was later. Some people think it was earlier. But 1939 was the year that my dear parents got married. The custom at the time, in a lot of European places, but especially in Budapest, Hungary, was that if you got engaged, you wore the same wedding band that you would use during the ceremony. All you did was put it on your right hand, signifying that you're engaged, and then you put it on your left hand when you got married. Notwithstanding, the fancy diamond engagements were not full. They were so dirt poor that they couldn't afford anything other than this ordinary, simple wedding. So, my maternal grandparents in 1942, the year I was born. Sadly, I never got to meet them, but they got to meet me. Because they had the misfortune of not living in Budapest. They lived in a place called Pécs, which was close to the then Yugoslavian border. And when the Nazis started rounding up the Jews in Hungary, all the people outside of Budapest were rounded up, and the majority of them were transported directly to Auschwitz. Because this presentation tonight is sponsored by the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, I cannot begin to tell you my incredible debt and obligation to that Wiesenthal Center, because I was their guest this past summer, and we had action, a compassion to action, 25 people on a mission, highly placed educators, chief of police of Toronto, and other educators who visited Poland and Israel to learn about Holocaust education. During this trip, I had that opportunity to say a Kaddish to my grandparents in the largest cemetery of the world. The largest cemetery in the world. If you think about that for a moment, the significance of the incredible hatred that must have possessed these people. Because when I was finished with my tour, everybody in the group was silent. Not one of us was able to say a word. When this initial shock passed, somebody asked me what was my impression. And I had to think about it for a while. And my impression was intelligent human beings design, execute, and build a murder factory dedicated to human beings. Those of you who have heard of the Banzai Conference, I can tell you briefly, there were 12 PhDs in a conference that decided how to handle the final solution. But how can you have a final solution to a non-existing problem? How can you come up with a final solution that will end up in murdering human beings, just like animals? My friends, this is why I do what I do. And this is why I'm so pleased that you are here to listen and to learn. My other grandparents, with whom I lived all my life, and we were fortunate to live in Budapest. These are my paternal grandparents. I'm going to talk a little bit about my grandfather later on, but right now let me just say, he was the father figure, and my mother was the father that I didn't have. Age 31, in the prime of his life, second generation swimming instructor, the love of his life, 5'0", and the product of their love. Blonde, blue-eyed, yeah, I was. Doesn't look Jewish, but he had to be murdered because he was the son of 2 Jews. And because a madman declared him to be ein Leben nicht wertig, a life not worthwhile living. Well, my friends, you have proof that my life is worthwhile living. Yesterday, I was at a Catholic school where they actually started a campaign dedicated to me called Blue Shirt Day this coming Friday, January 27, in commemoration of the Holocaust Education Week. And I'd like to think that maybe I still have a few more years left in which I'm going to prove that haters that yes, my life is worth living. I'm not a particularly religious man. And for me, the concept of God took a long time to make peace with. In fact, God and I were not good friends until after my son was born. And later on, I'll explain to you what the change was. But right now, getting back to the concept of God, and no man has the right to decide over another one, his fate. But during the Shoah, which is my preference for the word Holocaust, and by the way, those of you who do not know, Holocaust is from ancient and Greek, holos and kostos, of sacrificial fire without remnants. So the concept of the Holocaust and God, and where was God during the Holocaust? Mary Wiesel had the best answer that I have ever heard. The answer is, the question is not where was God, where was man? That is what we are here today to talk about. I'm not tonight, but I'm hoping you'll take it away with you and you'll have discussions about it. Next one. I was born Reknitzer András. We didn't change the name until after liberation in 1945. Reknitz is a village in modern-day Austria, but during the 18th and 19th century, the borders were shifting so frequently, and in fact, Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that is where my grandfather came from. Reknitzer is the villager of Reknitz. We changed it not to be so obviously picked out as Jews, and unfortunately, it did not happen. In 1956, during the Hungarian uprising against the Soviet occupation, there was already graffiti on the wall which said, "Itzi nem kell menni Auschwitzig." The Jews don't have to go to Auschwitz. We take care of you right here, right now. Imagine that the hate, a mere 11 years after the Holocaust, was so deeply entrenched in some people that while they were fighting for their freedom, they still had time to hate the Jews. Now, this actually is a very special picture, three combined pictures. Number one is the village. Number two, I am standing with my lovely bride of over 20 years, because my dear wife of 32 years, daughter of Holocaust survivors, passed away at a young age of 53. And we are standing in front of a brick wall, holding the book that Sydney made reference to, because that was the year 2016 that this book was published. And I'm going to make a donation to the Youth Club eventually. But the most significant part was that if you look through this opening here, and as I said, this is the outside of a brick wall. If you look through that opening, you're going to see this incredibly bucolic and beautiful field. And if you can imagine, after liberation in 1945, it was still a killing field. They were murdering their Jews who survived the death camps. They were just returning to their home. But the hatred was so deep that they had to be killed and murdered. I'm going to come back to the brick wall in a few minutes, but right now, this is significant. And I am holding this plaque in my hand. And in a few minutes, you'll get to hear about this plaque as well. Next one, please. This is where I was born. How many have you been? How many of you have been? Okay, take a deep breath. Start all over. How many of you have been to Europe and seen this kind of apartment building? Quite a few. Quite a few. Very good. This is typical. This is typical in all of the capitals of Europe. In fact, Vienna and Budapest have such similarities that I challenged a friend of mine to go blindfolded in front of the Opera House in Vienna and go blindfolded in front of the Opera House in Budapest. And I challenged him to tell the difference. And you can't. It's identical. So the buildings are very similar. Now, as human beings, we like to stick with our own kinds. We don't like strangers. We don't like new things. We want to be feeling safe and comfortable. This was in the heart of the Jewish district. Before we started, I was asked, where do I live? Sydney told me that she lives in Thornhill, when she's in Toronto, or nearby. I live at Western Shepherd. To this day, it's very well a Jewish area. At one time, it was the Jewish area. How many of you heard of the Manor? Very good. If you have the opportunity, there is an exhibition right now about the Manor, its history, which is fascinating, with some photographs. But the Manor was designed mainly for Jewish people. We have a tendency to migrate. We started out downtown, we had the Jewish market, then we went to College and Bathurst, then we went north and north and north, and right now we live in New Market. But that's human nature. We like to be together with our own kind. So this was no different. 70 to 75% of the population in this apartment building and all the others were made up of Jews. The first apartment, if you go under the 5 stores, you go in a road tunnel, a very short tunnel. You come out at the end of the tunnel, and the first apartment is what you see. That is where we lived. 2 rooms. Eventually, we had a washroom, but at the beginning, there was a common washroom at the back. We didn't have our own washroom, just 2 rooms. I lived with my grandparents and my mother. So imagine this is March 15, 1944. The governor of Hungary is a fellow by the name of Reti. He wasn't particularly in love with the Jews, but he was reasonably decent that he didn't allow the Jews to have any harm come to them. As I said, Hungary was an ally of Germany. From March until October, there was a lot of turmoil. On October 15, he was thrown out of power. The Hungarian Nazi Party came into power, and that is when our Shoah started. Now imagine, this is where we are. We have a knock on the door, and young ducks, not too much older or younger than you guys, come to our door with guns, and an order is given that you have 5 minutes to pack up and take with you only what you could carry. What would you take with you? You have 5 minutes to pack up. Okay, what would you take? How about you? Good. And you? The elixir of life. My friends, it has been proven that you can live without food for X number of days, but not without liquid. Not without water, not without liquid. So my mother was an incredible woman. In fact, she was an extraordinary woman, and I can prove it to you because she was a little modest. She wrote her autobiography called An Ordinary Woman in Extraordinary Times, but I did not accept it. I wrote a sequel to her book called The Son of an Extraordinary Woman. And I can tell you my delight when those 2 books were combined into one, or stronger together. But she has proven her incredible ability right then and there. When the first hardship fell on us, she packed a little knapsack with some crackers and some liquid, a thermos of tea. And she asked my grandmother to follow us no matter what happened. Naturally, she had to carry me, so she couldn't carry too much else. But my grandmother carried as much as she could. So 75% of the Jews in this building and all the surrounding buildings, and we're given an order to go, and we have no idea where we're going. We have no idea what's going to happen to us. However, I am now going to let you listen to my mother to describe what happened. It was perfectly fine in rehearsal.
Sorry, one moment.
Just give it one more second. We had it going. instead of the bystander. My friends, sadly, bullying is a worldwide phenomenon that takes place everywhere. Schools, offices, factories, on the street. It is so much easier to stand back and try to crawl into the first available hole because we don't have any time. So you have to understand the significance of one man going against the crowd. One man who had the courage and distinction to say, this is wrong. Imagine how much different the outcome would have been if people back in Germany, when this horror started, would have said, no, what you're doing is wrong. Anybody happen to know how many people started the Nazi Party? 6 people, including Hitler. He came to power by democratic means, and slowly, and then faster, he perverted the power, and it led to the slaughter of 6 million of our relatives, and eventually 5 million others, 11 million victims to an ideology that said one race is the master of all others. Quite often I come across classes with kids from different backgrounds. And I will usually ask, you like sports? Of course. What's your favorite sport? Anybody who likes running? Okay. Anybody knows who Jesse Owens is? For those who do not know, or was afraid to put up their hands, he was an Olympic champion, a black man, a Negro, who was going to show that superior Nazi race what human beings are capable. And usually I will have this dialogue with a black kid, and I'm going to tell this black kid that it doesn't matter that he was an Olympic champion in Berlin in 1936. He still would have been murdered because he happened to be black. Again, hatred running so deep. How can we even think about it? But it has happened. The Nazis have this ideology that they were the master race. Germany, Uber alles, by the way, I hate that word Uber, but that's what it means, over. The Nazis over all of us. Now, you know my age, and you know that we are now into our Holocaust or Shoah horrors. So we are rounded up, we're taken out of our home, and in no time at all, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people are forced to march down the street. We have no idea where. In about 15 minutes, an order is given, halt, a blanket is put down on the ground, and every piece of jewelry that you had on you had to be handed over at the of his own demise to your captain. My mother was so much in love with that man, and she only had her wedding band. If you were in your situation, where would you hide the wedding band? Questions? You got it? Anybody like to volunteer? They would find the wedding band? Yes. I don't think there would be that much time to do it because they would notice. Remember, young thugs with guns are and standing over you, watching what you do. Well, let me tell you what my extraordinary mother did with that ring, with the ring. Okay, with the ring. She hid it in that baby's diaper. Now, I don't know if anybody heard that sometimes if you touch manure, it should and supposed to bring you good luck. This ring had brought me my share of good luck. So we're robbed. We end up in an open air racetrack. We're forced into the infield. And the climate in Hungary is rather similar to what we have in Canada. In fact, what is going on right now. Damp, drizzly, miserable. So this was our first exposure to the horrors that were yet to come and were experienced by our brothers and sisters in other countries. We were forced into the open air racetrack. October 16, 17, and 18. During these 3 days, we had a number of miracles that saved us. I mentioned to you that I heard the story of all the other survivors, and one of the other common denominator is that no survivor was able to do it without the help of at least one other person, the upstander. As my mother used to describe it, the person who had a heart in the cavity, where a lot of others had rocks. She was a very gentle woman, not like her taxi driver's son. She would not go any further. Those people who had rocks in their cavity, as she said, she cannot forget it, and she cannot forgive it, and she didn't. But that is why she became a Holocaust educator, and that is why I am following in her footsteps. So eventually there was no room to even stand, let alone sit. In about a couple hours, an order was given. Every mother with a child under the age of 3, put that child down and walk away from that child. Can you imagine this kind of cruelty? But this was only the beginning. A lot worse have happened to others and to us as well. Well, this is where her request to my grandmother to follow her came through. In a few seconds, my grandmother came by, picked me up, and carried me away. But right then and there were some babies trampled to death because they didn't have a grandmother or a relative to take care of them. In a few minutes, my grandmother was able to reunite me with my mother. And the second miracle took place shortly after that. She recognized a young policeman from her hometown, and she begged him for help. Now you have to understand, the police is based on following orders. This young policeman easily could have said, I don't know you, get back in line, I want nothing to do with you. But this was the upstander, the one who could and did help. He said, you see that group over there? Make sure you don't get mixed up with them because they'll be taken to Auschwitz. So this was the second miracle that happened. We avoided getting mixed up. I mentioned to you the Hungarian Jews were the last intact population, and out of the approximately 600,000 Jews who lived in Hungary at the time, almost 500,000 were murdered. We were the lucky ones who survived. But a lot of Hungarians were taken to Auschwitz, and I mentioned to you that we still have a few precious survivors. These Hungarian survivors all survived Auschwitz. So it was one miracle after another. October 18, I don't have to tell you the significance. 3 o'clock in the morning, the light comes on. The loudspeaker says, you can all go home now. Well, as we are leaving with our back turned to the good Nazis, they were shooting at us and people on either side of us were murdered. But miraculously, we survived. So what now? When we go home, not much else. Our freedom was only 2 days. In 2 days' time, we rounded up again. And this time we're taken to a brick factory. That's why I told you, pay attention to that brick wall. Apparently, a lot of places where the Jews were ghettoized, they chose brick factories as a sorting point. I truly don't know why. I actually been meaning to look into it and I never looked around to it. But brick factories were a sorting ground. So at this brick factory, we once again are fortunate not to be shipped out, and we are sent to a ghetto. The ghetto was an identical building where we lived, and the address of it was number 9 of Cage Street. And I put my two stories together, and I recognized the significance and the recurring occurrence of 18. I said, number 9, half of 18, so far so good, they're doing okay. Well, we were taken into a 2-room apartment on the 2nd floor, unlike where we were, and 27 people were crammed into this unit. With the 27 people, 6 of them were children under the age of 7, and my mother was together with her best friend, and I only found out years and years later that her husband and my father were in the same unit. So my mother was together with her best friend who had a little baby a few months older than me. And the 2 mothers shared a fold-out Chesterfield with the mothers on the outside of the fold-out Chesterfield and the babies between the 2 mothers like this. Now, I didn't tell you, so I'm telling you, this is one of 2 personal recollections of the Holocaust, because as the 2 babies were sleeping between the 2 mothers, my little friend Katie, after whom I named my daughter, in Hungarian, it's Katica, ladybug, and she is the lady, she is. But my little friend Katie had the coldest feet in the universe. And I remember this, I remember it vividly. Now, I mentioned to you that I am married for the 2nd time. My dear first wife had cold feet, and I jumped when she touched it. And my dear wife currently has cold feet, and she thinks it's in the katuba that I gotta keep her warm. And it's not in the katuba, and I can't, and I jump when she pushes her cold feet against me. But that's a trauma that will live the day I die. So this is my first ghetto experience. The second one comes not too much after this. Next one, please. Okay. December 25, somehow my grandfather escapes his forced labor battalion and he finds us. And not only does he find the right ghetto, but he's able to sneak in because by that time the gates of the ghetto were shut. And this presented an incredible happiness and relief for my mother and grandmother, but brought with it one huge additional problem. One more mouth to feed. Now, my friends, when I lost my dear wife, for the first time in my life, I was left alone with 2 children. They were not young, they were young adults. But the responsibility that you have children that depend on you hit me like a ton of bricks. And that is why this episode that I'm about to share with you is so meaningful for me. Because by that time, the rations and provisions we had were practically non-existent. My grandmother was able to have a container of flour, which literally was powder. She was able to bake 2 little biscuits, no bigger than the palm of my hand. And when my mother asked her to give it to her husband and take something from it, she said, I can't. What am I going to tell my son that I did not take care of? Friends, only a woman can do this. Not that men are selfish, but the fact that you have a child that you give birth to brings a special bond. For a woman to say, what am I going to tell my son that I did not take care of? Little did we know that the Son, the Father, the center of our universe, will never return to us. These two pictures are significant. The first one is just shortly after our liberation. The second one is a year after liberation. And you see that we are still skin and bones, but you see that the son, the husband, the father is not dead. I didn't know for a long time the true event surrounding my father's murder. Next one. Again, a brick wall signifying our liberation, January 18, 1945. And this was in 2016, because that was the year this book got published. And I lost track of my little friend for 40 years. And this year I was able to go back and reconnect with her. And I was able to go back and retrace our steps. So this is in front of a brick wall commemorating our liberation. Next one. I mentioned to you at the beginning that my father, second generation swimming instructor, and sadly, I have now, you are looking at the third and last generation of swimming instructor. At age 14, in 1956, when we left Hungary, I had hopes and dreams of becoming an Olympian. In my mind, I still am. And I actually won a national championship for my age group, both individual and relay. And I'm sure you want to know which one, the best looking one. I was a volunteer swimming instructor at the JCC or the Y for over 30 years. I was one of the longest serving volunteers. I never knew it. I didn't do it deliberately, but in our culture, in our religion, it's tzedakah, and to be a volunteer is an obligation. I didn't know it, but I just lived it. I did it. And I enjoyed. Hillel, as you know, is a teacher. I enjoyed sharing my knowledge, regardless what it was, but it just so happened that swimming was very good. I was a reasonably good swimmer and an equally reasonably good instructor. That's my youth in a picture. Next one, please. Now, I mentioned to you at the beginning, and I asked the question, hate, indifference. And I don't have to tell you, in our custom, if a person dies, they have to be buried within 24 hours, and within a year, a stone has to be erected. Well, needless to say, the Holocaust did not offer that to a lot of families. In fact, to this day, there are a lot of people who have no knowledge, no idea where their loved ones, what their remains are. So the large Jewish cemetery in Hungary at the entrance has a memorial, and it says, hatred has killed them. May love cherish their memory. Hatred and love connected again. What you're looking at are empty markers. It says 820 martyrs, resting place forever. Out of the 820, 224 are unknown. But my father does have a communal marker And it is commemorated with a number of others. And my grandparents put up that additional plaque there. This was the first time my mother and I went back to Hungary almost ages ago. That's when. Now, I don't have to tell you what a bar mitzvah is, but just in case, if we have people amongst us who are not familiar with the custom, at age 13, a boy becomes a man. He is obligated to study our sacred Torah, recite a portion of it in front of the congregation, and after that, he is fully qualified to participate in all religious ceremonies. I don't think I have to tell you that it's a big deal. It's a really big deal to have a bar mitzvah. Sad to say, bar mitzvah not as much. One of these days we'll catch up, but a bar mitzvah is a big deal. So here is my wonderful stepfather, another survivor that my mother married in 1958, shortly after we came to Canada. The only grandfather my two children knew. And this is her right now. 7 years between the two of them. And you see the remnants of our entire family of well over 100. You see me at the back, standing next to me is the man who came all the way from Israel and was a first cousin to my father, and he was with him in the labor battalion. I didn't know this man even existed. So just before the bar mitzvah, I had an opportunity to speak to him. And in the lull during the ceremony, I asked him, Cousin Harry, how come you were able to survive and my father did not? And he told me that they were closing, the Russians were closing in on them. They could hear the gunfire. And Harry asked my father to escape with him. And my father said to him, Harry, I have Ibby and Andy waiting for me. You're not married. If we get caught, if we get caught, we'll be shot. Harry only got about 200 yards away, but the brutal machine gun fire murdered 28 young innocents, fathers, sons, husbands. They didn't have to murder them. The war was lost. But the hatred was so deep. They had the guns and they were still killing and murdering the Jews. I can't tell you the number of times I wondered all my life how our lives would have been, could have been, should have been different had Solti left. But I made peace, and it took me a long time, a very long time to make peace that Solti died because he loved. Solti died because he loved. Now, I told you that I did not have a very good relationship with God. As a matter of fact, communists are professional atheists. My grandfather was a rabid communist. He was a functionary in the Communist Party. How I had a bar mitzvah is beyond my comprehension, but he did not show up in my bar mitzvah. So religion wasn't that important for me. Wasn't important for him. I could live without it. But let me tell you, God and I became friends after my son was born. The miracle of life, it will change every one of us. As I said, I am not particularly religious, but I do believe that we have a deity above us. And I do address a lot of diverse audiences. And that is a common description. Yesterday, I was at a very, very special presentation, a Catholic school in Oakville. And these young kids heard my Zoom presentation a year ago. And I was wearing the same shirt. And they were so impressed that they wrote over 100 letters to politicians And in fact, the Ministry of Culture by the name of Mohammed. Forgive me, don't use a long name. He actually came on Zoom with us, and January 27th, 3 days from now, they are going to have a dedication. They are asking every office and building to have a plaque which says never again. So for me to have been the inspiration for this movement is incredible. And forgive me, I was going to bring the t-shirt, but I forgot. Anyway, next one, please. Now, I don't think that too many people can make the claim that I'm a biker because of my mother and the Holocaust. But I am a biker because of my mother and the Holocaust. And this might prove it to you. This is my biker look. I'll be back, baby. In the name of my good biker buddy, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The reason that my mother was extraordinary was because at age 6, she allowed me to go on a full-size motorcycle. There was a small amusement park, and one of the attractions was a full-size adult motorcycle. And when the carney saw me backing and jumping, comes over to my mother and says, if you let him go on the bike, I'll only charge you half price. So my mother says, he's too little, his feet don't reach the ground. Some people say nothing has changed in 80 years, but she relented and she let me go on a bike. A thrill of a lifetime. Now, she had a fabulous memory, but she couldn't remember that she let me do that. So at age 60, when I bought my first brand new motorcycle, and I told her about it, she goes like this for 2 minutes. Did I mention that she graduated with top honors in Jewish Mother's Drama Queen School? She wasn't thinking what kind of a leather jacket to get me. She comes up and she says, how can you do such a bad thing to me? Mother, I'm not dead yet. Anyway, I got my first brand new motorcycle, and I joined a motorcycle club called HEWs, Hidden on Wheels. Jews on Wheels. And we had our first ever R2R, Right to Remember. Now you can't see it too clearly, but there is a saying right here. We write to remember so the world will not forget. The first ever Right to Remember was to the Washington Holocaust Museum in 2005. And by that time, my mother was very seriously ill with her first cancer. And I was on the organizing committee, and I told her I'm not going to go. And she told me that she wants me to go because by the time May comes around, I will not have a mother. And she wanted me to ride in her honor, which I did. I had this poster on my bike, and I asked every other motorcycle rider to dedicate the ride to someone special. And I was the editor of the, I was the editor of the special booklet in which we are dedicating our ride to victims of the Holocaust. This is our group of Toronto riders. We had over 250 motorcyclists in front of the Washington Holocaust Museum. And it was a 3-day ride to get there. There is a saying in motorcycle circles that there are only 2 kinds of motorcycle riders. One who's already gone down and kissed the ground, and one who's about to. Well, My dear mother passed away February of 2005, and the ride was in May. When I had the horrible task of clearing out her apartment, and I came across her necklace, the one that Christina goes on, I decided to make it into a showpiece, as the original is just the final ring. The setting is what makes it a little bit more interesting. But it was way too big and it did not fit under my riding glove. So I had no choice but to put it inside my breast pocket. Well, when you crash a bike at 60 into a ditch, something gives. Either the bike or the biker or both. But not this time, because I had the ring of love next to my heart. Thank you for listening. There's one more part that we have to do. Can you go to the picture and Parliament Hill? Would you all please stand up? I don't think I have to tell you where this is or what it is, but let me tell you, I had the privilege of reciting this at the steps of Parliament Hill. Eventually, thousands and thousands of people have heard it. And I usually have a marker, and because I don't have a good memory, I got to read it to you, and take me a moment, I will find it. But this is the pledge of never again, which yesterday every student in an Oakville Catholic school did. And it was really an honor to be together with these young people, our future. My name is Andy Reti, a young child Holocaust survivor and a member of the HEW Motorcycle Club of Toronto. Less than 70 years ago, the world of 6 million Jewish people, including my own father, came to an end in an act that is so evil that the only word that can describe it is Holocaust. I stand before you as a witness and a free man to tell all, never again. Never again to any and all genocides. Never again to racial hatred. Never again to a second Holocaust. Please take this pledge by repeating it with me. We pledge to speak up against hatred and racism. We pledge to remember. Please put your hand over your heart and say, we pledge never again. We pledge never again. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and we really all enjoyed and we're so lucky to hear your Holocaust survival story. And again, we thank Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for being able to hear you today. And now that you've all heard Andy's story, and you're now a witness of his story as well as his mother's story, and everything that he's told you today, I hope that you'll remember and take with you and repeat to other people when they ask you to learn more about the Holocaust or in conversations of the Holocaust. You're now an educated member who can share more information about that and continue to enact the pledge of never again. And now we're going to take some questions from the audience and from Zoom. So if anyone on Zoom has any questions, type it in the chat. And if anyone in the room has any questions, you can put up your hand or just feel free to speak up.
That first question is always the most difficult one. And I just want to kind of elaborate on what Sydney just said. Elie Wiesel said, if you listen to a survivor, you become a witness. Think about it. this is something that you have heard. And yet today, if you can believe, people actually have the wherewithal to argue that it did not happen. Well, sadly it did. And today, with the rise of Jew hatred again, this is why you, my young friends, are doing such an important job. I know that your students, you have a full day ahead of you, you had a full day behind you, and being here, listening to it indeed is very worthy of you, and I thank you. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes.
Sorry, you were pretty young when you were do you have any memories that there?
I was pretty young when I was in the ghetto, and do I have the memories that I can share? This was one of them when I talked about my young friend's cold feet. That's a personal memory. Another one is that on January 18th, we were literally hours away from starving to death. And we were lucky that we were liberated by the Russians, who knew how to treat people with starvation. And my grandfather fainted from hunger. And my mother saw the first Russian soldier entering our ghetto, asked, begged for him to give us some bread. And he gave us a piece of dark Russian rye bread. And I do remember that, yes. Very good question. I think there was a question here. Yes.
Well, thank you for coming here and sharing your story. I definitely really appreciate it. You mentioned at the beginning how there are only now a handful of
Eyewitnesses.
eyewitnesses, eyewitness survivors. What would you say, in your opinion, is the best way to honor them while they're still with us, and once they are gone, how can we?
Question was, how can we honor them, the eyewitnesses while they're living, and once they're gone, how can we honor them? By carrying on their legacy, by trying to shed light where darkness is, and being students of history. And now that you've taken this pledge, you all have a responsibility to ensuring that education will prevail over ignorance. A little while ago, I had the opportunity to talk to a class where a similar question was asked, and actually it was a young March of the Living participants just a few days ago. And the question was, how can you convince somebody that is a Holocaust denier or distorter? And I said, if you cannot reason with them, just walk away from it. It's not worth it for you to waste your energy with someone who is so determined not to be willing to learn and listen. There are other people, and yet it doesn't happen. And one of the best examples I can give, a lot of us who go down to Florida during the cold winter months, we do speak at the Holocaust Center in Florida, where it is, by the way, mandatory to have Holocaust education. And I'm very pleased to tell you that as of September of this year, it will be mandatory Holocaust education for grade 6 here in Ontario as well. But the point I'm making here is that they have a speaker on their roster who's a former skinhead and white supremacist who was thrown in jail. And after she came out of jail, I can't say for sure, but I think it was someone from Hillel, but I don't know for certain, took her under their wing, and she is now one of the best Holocaust educators who actually subsequently obtained her PhD in Holocaust education. So indeed, Our job is to shed light and dispel the ignorance. One other related topic. How many of you have heard of the paperclip project? Wow, cool. My motorcycle club went down to Whitfield, Tennessee, and we donated $80,000 for that project. And those of you who don't know the paperclip project is, it's a school in Whitfield, Tennessee, population 1,400, who'd never heard of Jews, never heard of the Holocaust, who didn't know anything about it. They had two teachers who took a diversity course, and afterwards they were going to teach the Holocaust. And one of the students asked, "What's 6 million?" And indeed, what is 6 million? So the classroom was given an assignment to come up with a way to explain 6 million. Now, by the way, I mentioned to you that I have been doing this for over 20 years. Usually I describe 6 million by saying the GTA is about 3 million people. Imagine murdering everyone in the GTA, filling up the GTA again, and murdering that again. That's 6 million. But it's a little difficult to explain this to grade 8 students. So they came up with the project of paperclips. And paperclip was invented in Norway. And they decided that they want to collect 6 million paperclips. I'm still wearing the original paperclip from that trip. And now it had progressed that they have an original rail car that was used to transport the Jews, and they have over 11 million paperclips, not all of it in the rail car, but it's a Holocaust museum. And their motto is, and this is why your question was so good, the motto is, we are teaching the world one classroom at a time. Because the children, it's a children's Holocaust museum run by the students who have to take a special course. And people from all over the world come and watch it. And there is a very, very good documentary about the history. So, yeah, thank you.
We had another question in the chat as well. And the question was, what led you to reconstruct your relationship with God? What led you to reconstruct your relationship with God?
I mentioned that it was a miracle of birth, but more importantly, and perhaps the overwhelming desire for me to give my children Jewish education. Both my children had proper Jewish education. And at that time, how can you give a child Jewish education if you don't believe in God? So it was an awakening moment. Thank you for the question. Yes.
A lot of people these days talk about Holocaust experience. So what cases do you think a lot of broken Holocaust and this
Basically, the question is, where do you draw the line between Holocaust denial, distortion, and comparison to other genocides or other tragic events?
and also when is it appropriate? Now, general.
In my opinion, never. However, it does happen. And how do you distinguish when, as Kenny Roger would say, when do you say this is something that I don't want to get into? Because in a way, if you say that, you're simply walking away from a challenge. But the challenge is indeed that the Holocaust was unique. A few days ago, I got an email from someone in my family, and it was a Mogen David, and in it, it said, I stand up for the gays because I love them. I stand up for the immigrants because I love. And this is similar to the Holocaust. And my answer was, yes, the Nazis were persecuted in that case, the homosexuals, yes, they were suffering. But today, nobody's murdering them, nobody's throwing them into gas chambers, and those immigrants who are trying to escape their troubles at home and trying to go to US or Canada or anywhere, they're not being murdered for their crime of wanting to escape. So for me personally, there is a very strong line where one person's freedom to speak ends up with another person's right to murder. That is where I draw the line. Very tough, provoking question. I'm not sure if I gave you the right answer, but that's my answer. I think you know, I understand. It is not an easy topic, but I do appreciate your being here. I truly am. Richard, on it. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to ask where we could find another book that you combine the author's version and your version. Is that findable?
I am giving it to Bilal. I'm donating this book. It is available, I think, on Amazon. I'm not sure, but I'm donating it to the organization.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any final questions?
The beginning, you said with your mother, she said that she was never able to forgive, and reasonably so. I was curious about you. Do you also feel the same way about never being able to forgive?
For me, as not having lived under the trials and tribulations and horrors as my mother did, it's not the same as for her. If you think about it for a moment, she was never alone. She never had anything on her own. She was a young widow who was forced to live with her in-laws, and she had to raise a child after the horrors that she had gone through. So for her to go and say, I can't forget it and I can't forgive it, understandable. For me, the memory is not that deep. For me to say that I will hate every German or every Ukrainian would be hypocritical. How can you hate someone when you don't know them? I mean, why do we hate spinach? I love spinach.
Okay. Thank you, Andy, so much for sharing your story. Two things that I've thought a lot about. Two things that I'm thinking a lot about is, one, the importance of upstanders or getting to know different people's stories from different perspectives. So I really appreciate all of you in the room, online, that have taken the time to hear the story. But one other piece that sort of comes through for me is that it's not just about hearing the story of the past, it's seeing the living memory and understanding how the people that were trying to wipe out were individuals, have things to contribute, as you mentioned, that you have a lot to continue to offer, hopefully for many more years to come. And that I hope that that's a really big, important takeaway for me and for all of us, that it's not only about learning about the past and how we don't repeat it, but it's also about what are the different lessons and things that can actually change in our lives here and now, and how we see the importance of community, of love, of different identities that have guided you through this. And you are the first speaker of our Holocaust Education Week, and that is one of the pieces that we've built out around it, is that it's about learning about the past and experiencing real individuals, real stories, real identities that were affected, so that you're able to see, not just learn something from the history books, but understand how it can really be an important part of your life moving forward. So I want to thank you. Thank you all for coming out. And there are a lot of other experiences that are happening this week in order to live part of the Jewish experience. And actually, one thing I wanted to highlight that you mentioned so much about the importance of the bar mitzvah is that actually Friday night we're doing our Holocaust Education Week Shabbat dinner, and it's actually being dovetailed with someone in the community who's having his bar mitzvah this week. So it's a really nice opportunity to experience the past and also see the rite of passage of continuity. So you're all invited to come, and also your friends, but please sign up so we have enough food. We would like everybody to come up so we can take a picture with
I
Andy.
want to say
and-
one thing, just
Okay.
to answer your question. His book is available on the Azrieli Foundation